Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Conversations of the ORF. Today, we are going to be looking at the PLA Air Force and the Indian Air Force, in particular, looking at the induction by the Indian Air Force of the Rafale fighter aircraft. There has been a minute-to-minute conversation commentary on the Rafales coming into India. To talk about these issues, I have with me my colleague, Angad Singh, who is the project coordinator of the ORF Strategic Studies program. So let me start with this conversation. What is the importance of the Rafale induction? Would it make an immediate difference on the air balance between China and India?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Raji. It's a big deal beyond the India-China equation for a minute and beyond India-Pakistan and the regional equation. I think the reason it's been hyped so much is that it's the first time the Indian Air Force is getting a new fighter in a long time. I know the Tejas has been inducted in 2016 and now again a new squadron this year. But I think at least the way the Air Force, a lot of people in the Air Force would see it is, they're still hand-holding that program. And they're still working up that indigenous capability. Whereas, the Rafale is the first time they're getting a new aircraft off the shelf since the Sukhois came in the late 90s. The Sukhoi 30s. And since the Mirage, it is the first time that the Air Force is getting an aircraft that they want. No compromises, no political diplomatic angle to it that we have to keep Russia happy or we have to keep so-and-so happy or whatever. It's the first time the Air Force has specified a requirement, found an aircraft that comes close to that requirement, and they're happy with how everything shakes out, and they're happy with the induction.
But how does it kind of match or compare with the Chinese Air Force and their capabilities?
Right. So the excitement and hype aside, at the moment, 5 aircraft doesn't move the needle significantly or meaningfully at all. What it does do in the near term is create the sort of nucleus for what will be meaningful over time. I think I've been over this on a separate conversation. 36 is not enough. 36 as a number is neither here nor there. I'm sure we will, and we certainly should see more Rafale come in, whether through this 114 aircraft MRFA requirement or just further direct buys, whichever is easier, whichever is cheaper. And in that context, in the larger context, when we move past the 36 figure, the Rafale is, becomes a potent force in the region.
Okay.
As an aircraft, and as a system. So it's important, it's important to note that the baseline Rafale is incredibly capable, and the Indian Air Force requirements for MMRCA, which is sort of where this has been hived off from, were very exacting requirements. Officially, no aircraft met those requirements. It's just that there were some aircraft that were closer to what the Air Force wanted than others. And that's how the down selection and the shortlisting happened. And fundamentally, this aircraft brings a lot of technology to the table that either doesn't have an equivalent or is better than the equivalent in the region, whether it is in terms of its long-range weaponry or its sensor suite and sensor fusion. Yep. So when you're sitting in a cockpit and you're looking at the one screen or the 2 screens or 3 screens in front of you, yep. I mean the basic idea is you want to know what's happening. You want to be better informed than the other guy. Yep. You want to see the other guy, and if necessary, you want to shoot the other guy, and you want to do all this better than him and before him. Yep. And in that sense, that is in a nutshell what the Rafale enables at a technological level.
Okay. So that brings me to the next question. So what is the overall order of battle as far as the air power is concerned, in a sense? Because there are a lot of questions about on the Sino-Indian border, for instance, high altitude issues, the Chinese ability to take off from Tibet, in a sense. There are weight restrictions that come into play. How do you see that particular problem? Because I want to ask, is it, for instance, for China to possibly fly in from outside and do mid-air refueling so that they don't have those weight restrictions that will impose as a burden on them? So is that a possibility? Have the Chinese invested enough in terms of the air refueling capabilities? Can they do something of that kind? So does that change the equations on the border, the balance on the border?
Right. So in the Chinese context, there are two elements to the air power that China can bring to bear on India. One is the airfield issue that you pointed out. The vast majority of airfields on the Tibetan Plateau are high altitude airfields,
Right.
similar to the Leh Air Force Base on our side, which is the air is thinner, the runways need to be longer, takeoff and landing speeds are much higher. So there are a lot of overall restrictions. The Chinese have mitigated some restrictions simply by building incredibly long runways. So I think the payload, argument that we hear a lot is a little overblown, given the infrastructure the Chinese have in place there. Aircraft, the rate at which the speed at which they take off and land will have an impact on the wear and tear of the aircraft. Things like tires and brakes will need to be looked after more carefully. But I think fundamentally the payload issue is not much of a big deal. On the other hand, the infrastructure itself is very rudimentary because it's such an inhospitable environment. They don't have these full-fledged bases that we would expect to see on the Indian side, or even in Eastern China, where they have these incredibly complicated bases with underground and underground shelters, underground parking, hardened shelters on the surface, things like that. By comparison, the Tibetan bases are very, very bare bones. So they look like they're suited to quick force induction and a very short limited engagement. Other than that, just to build up forces in the region for posturing or deterrence. But in an all-out conflict, I don't see those bases being very survivable. Which brings us to the second element, which is, as you pointed out, that the threat of long-range aviation.
Yeah.
And that's where China has a fairly decent capability. Again, in terms of the long-range fighters, they have J-7s, all their various Sukhoi 27 derivatives, and more than that, they have long-range strike weapons. So they have long-range cruise missiles, air-launched cruise missiles. They have surface-to-surface missiles, and of course, beyond all that, they have aerial refueling.
Yeah.
So when you combine all that, whatever the Tibetan air bases do not enable or are restricted in enabling is sort of offset by their general long-range capability.
Yeah. That is precisely my point, because if they are able to bring in land forces from central part of China, so I thought that they should be able to do that within the everyday system also. So that brings to the whole the surface-to-surface missiles. I think that's another question that I would like you to kind of look at in a sense. The Chinese are bringing in a lot of surface-to-surface missiles. How do they shift the balance in terms of their ability to target Indian Air Force facilities and so on and so forth? Is that a credible issue to look at, credible threat for us to look at, and how does that play out?
Again, no. And a few months ago, you and we spoke about this with Frank O'Donnell.
Right.
The fundamental limiting factor for the Chinese side is the targeting. We have an incredible proliferation of bases, which they don't. The flip side is, their bases, their important bases are more or less out of our reach, at least, at a tactical level. The Tibetan bases aren't hugely important. And on our side, all the bases are important, but there are also so many of them. And almost all of them have fairly developed infrastructure. I mean, some of them lag a little further behind than others. But compared to the equivalent bases on the Tibetan Plateau, the Indian bases are, the difference is night and day. You have multiple runways or multiple taxiways. You have parking, you have air defense, you have your hardened shelters, that can withstand direct hits from bombs and missiles and so on. So the relative effort required to knock out an Indian, to properly take an Indian airfield out of commission is immense. It can be done, but the Chinese would have to spend a frankly obscene amount of ordnance to accomplish that. Okay. And anything short of that, we have systems and protocols and equipment in place to effect relatively quick repairs. So as far as airfields being taken out of commission, that's a very tall order.
So yeah, so I think that's brings in kind of a close to, if you have any broader questions, how do you see the situations overall kind of playing out between India and China on the Eastern Ladakh situations? Is there something that you want to add there?
I mean, at the moment, we know what little there is to know about the situation. Is the talk is disengagement and de-escalation.
Yeah.
So I mean, really, there's nothing to add there. I'm sure Army, Navy, Air Force are all ready for whatever contingencies might emerge. Um, but actually, something I wanted to ask you was just recently, I think last week, Lieutenant General Panag, who's a former Northern Army commander, he wrote a piece laying out some options for India should things not go as planned. And one of them was to fight a limited conflict, or to initiate conflict on our own terms, in order to have that initiative.
Yeah.
And he mentioned, sorry, he mentioned, in addition to that, he mentioned a nuclear angle to a possible India-China conflict. And, that set a lot of tongues wagging. So I wanted to get your opinion on that. Where do you see the nuclear issue on this present face-off?
I think I would not put too much of emphasis on the nuclear angle, because I think typically we have looked at the nuclear angle when you took a look at the LAC, the India-Pakistan context. It's always been seen as an unstable border, uncertainties, a lot of a variety of kinds, including nuclear issues that have always played out in the case of India and Pakistan. But I don't think one associates that kind of unpredictability, at least with regard to the use of possible nuclear weapons. I don't think either the Indian side or the Chinese side would go down that path. And I don't think that on the Indian side, even if, for instance, Chinese were to undertake a massive attack try and capture Arunachal Pradesh or Tawang, for instance. I don't think even under that circumstances, I think India would go down to use of nuclear weapons, because essentially at the end of the day, we are talking about still a few hundred square kilometers of land in a sense. For that, would you risk the use of nuclear weapons? Because that is a very, very tall order, and it would unleash a full-fledged war between India and China for sure. But I think it also sort of it's a massive escalatory step in a sense. So I don't think India would go down that path. But at the same time, there have also been reports about massive naval deployments, air and naval deployments, including the Arihant and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I think it is more in terms of posturing, because if you look at the missiles on the Arihant, we still don't have sufficiently long range anywhere to target China in a sense. So I think it is merely posturing. When I read those reports, I just see that as some posturing and nothing more in a sense. But certainly, I don't associate the use of nuclear weapons in the India-China context. I think that's a little too flimsy. And I think in that sense, on that particular aspect, I think there is certain amount of leadership a responsibility on the part of both the leadership in both China and India to kind of not go down that path. But clearly, the certain amount of predictability that used to prevail on the India-China border has been questioned in recent times, last several years. And this year, certainly, the kind of Galvan clash and the kind of fatalities that we saw, clearly they are bringing in uncertain times. So, but at the same time, nuclear is something I don't foresee in the India-China context. So yeah, I think we're almost up with our time as well. So
Thanks, Raji. Thanks for doing this.
thank you.